Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 121, Graveyard of Hope. In the next 10 minutes, the foundations of Sunny's worldview were shaken to the core. Kai had drowned him in a torrent of questions, all of which had nothing to do with anything even remotely important. What interested the charming sleeper were very strange things like what types of shoes were in fashion, which celebrity wore what to some pompous award ceremony, who of them had a scandal and what was that scandal about, what was the latest dance craze, and so on. He was endlessly curious about that type of stupid crap and absolutely indifferent about all of Sunny's dark secrets. It was almost insulting. What's worse, Sunny felt like a complete fool because he couldn't provide even a single answer. What did he know about fashion and high culture? Nothing. After a while, Kai's enthusiasm had waned. Looking at Sunny with a comically disheartened face, he sighed and gently asked one last question. "Sunny, tell me honestly. Were you a hikikomori in the real world as well?" Sunny blinked. What is this fool talking about? A hick? A what? Kai cleared his throat and offered him an apologetic smile. You know. A recluse. A shut-in. Someone who lives under a rock. Sunny stared at the gorgeous young man, feeling like the world completely stopped making any sense ever since they had met. What are you talking about? Why would I live under a rock? You would freeze to death. I lived in a cargo container once, but it had 4 walls and a roof, at least. Kai sighed one more time and turned away. I see. Well, sorry to bother you. It's just that I've been stuck in this place for about 2.5 years now, and life here is so monotone. His beautiful profile was radiating melancholy and sadness, as though Kai was lamenting something serious, as opposed to utter rubbish. 2.5 years. That dimwit survived here for 2.5 years. Sunny was surprised to hear that. Kai seemed like a nice guy, but not exactly someone well suited for the ruthless nightmare of the Forgotten Shore. Perhaps he had underestimated the charming sleeper. Or perhaps there was another, much simpler reason. Sunny frowned. There was a group of people who tended to live here the longest. Suddenly suspicious, he asked in a cold tone, "Are you a part of Gunlog's gang?" Kai looked at him with surprise. Then, he chortled. Gods, no. If there's one thing I absolutely despise, it's bullies like him. I would rather die than become one of Gunlog's minions. Plus, the man has no style. That armor of his is the most hideous thing I have ever seen. However, after saying that, he suddenly grew quiet and added after a few seconds in a dejected voice, "But I do accept jobs from his lieutenants from time to time. That is the reason why he tolerates my existence, so I don't really have a choice." Sunny hesitated for a bit, but then decided that he believed the other sleeper. He really didn't look like one of Gunlog's thugs. Besides, if he had been one of them, no sane person would have dared to kidnap and imprison him. Members of Gunlog's cohort were nearly untouchable. Which meant that Kai was, indeed, much more capable than Sunny had given him credit for. Interesting. Noticing that the eerie sobs of the fallen beast had grown sufficiently distant, he shifted his perspective to the shadow and made sure that the terrible creature was already far away. Standing up, Sunny dismissed the glass bottle and said, "We're safe now. Time to move." Once they were ready to leave, he summoned the shadow back and prepared to take the first step forward. However, then Sunny suddenly stopped and glanced at the charming young archer with hesitation. "Hey, Kai. Can I ask you a question as well?" The older sleeper smiled, honesty and eagerness written all over his face. "Of course." Sunny was silent for a couple of seconds, then said in a strange voice, "That armor of yours. Do you wear it because it's the best one you could get, or because it looks good?" Kai looked at him with confusion. Raising one exquisite eyebrow, he said, "I don't understand the question. Is there a difference?" Sunny closed his eyes, sighed, and turned away. "Never mind. Let's go." As the sun rose above the horizon, they went deeper into the city, slowly approaching its center. The castle stood on a tall hill in the middle of the cursed city. It was grand and magnificent, with dozens of towers rising into the air, each supported by a number of elaborate arches and columns. Grotesque gargoyles were staring down on the ruins from under the eaves. The road leading to the castle was as impressive as the castle itself. It was narrow and heavily fortified, circling the hill in a way that allowed the defenders of the castle to endlessly rain arrows down on any possible attacker. At the end of the road, a grandiose staircase led to the gates of the castle. In front of it, there had once been a vast stone platform, meant to serve as the gathering ground for the soldiers in case the enemy was to somehow breach all but this one last line of defense. Now, the platform had turned into a makeshift settlement, with small shabby buildings made out of stone, wood, and anything else the inhabitants of this slum could get their hands on standing chaotically here and there, forming messy groups and narrow alleys. This place did not look like the outskirts where Sunny had grown up, but it had the same unmistakable air of misery, fear, and desperation. As the two of them approached the outer settlement, several sleepers greeted Kai with friendly smiles. "Hey, Knight. Glad to see you, man. Where have you been lately?" Kai smiled in embarrassment. "Ah, you know. Flying around. What about you, pal?" While the charming young man was exchanging pleasantries with his acquaintance, Sunny cautiously looked around. The place had imperceptibly changed since the last time he was here. The settlement itself seemed to be almost the same, with just a few buildings slightly changing shapes. The people, however. People somehow seemed more energized and confident, as though the ever-present fear of death and starvation was not as pressing anymore. However, there was a strange sense of tension in the air. I guess she was busy in these 3 months, too. Finally managing to end the conversation, Kai turned to him and smiled apologetically. "Sorry about that." Sunny frowned. "Why are they calling you Knight?" The charming young man stared at him, then cleared his throat and said with a bit of strangeness in his voice. "Oh, you really don't know. Well, it's a nickname of sorts. Nightingale, that's how I am known around these parts." What a stupid nickname, Sunny thought, and decided to get things done as quickly as possible. He couldn't wait to leave this depressing place. "All right, since we're here, time to make good on your promise." Kai gave him a nod. "Sure. What do you need me to do?" Sunny looked around, making sure that no one could hear them, and said, "It's simple. Go into the castle and find out about who is selling memories, and what the price is. Then come back and report to me." His companion blinked a couple of times, clearly surprised, then shrugged. "No problem. But it's going to take a while. If you want the best information possible, of course." Sunny grimaced. "Do as you see fit. I'll be waiting for you in that alley over there." Kai looked at him one last time, smiled, and walked away. Feeling nervous and tense, Sunny walked to a secluded alley and rested his back against the wall. He tried to become as small and unnoticeable as possible. Being here was making his skin crawl. Maybe his decision to come back was a mistake, after all. Maybe he should simply turn around and walk away. However, he didn't. Deep down inside, he knew that he had to take this opportunity to gather as many memories as possible, so that his shadow could become stronger as fast as possible. Perhaps he would never get this opportunity again. Time slowly passed. An hour went by, then another. Kai was certainly taking his sweet time gathering the information Sunny had asked from him. However, nothing bad had happened. Yet. Sunny was almost starting to believe that he was nervous for nothing, but then, of course, the thing he dreaded the most became a reality. A calm, painfully familiar voice suddenly resounded from somewhere behind him. "Hi, Sunny." He froze, feeling like a beast caught in a trap, and then slowly turned around. A strange, complicated expression appeared on his face. Forcing out a smile, Sunny licked his suddenly dry lips and said, "Hey, Neff. Long time no see." Chapter 122, 4 months ago. Nephi's changed a lot since the last time Sunny had seen her. Outwardly, she looked almost the same, tall, firm, and strangely distant, as though existing slightly apart from the rest of the world. She was still wearing the Starlight Legion armor, which accentuated the graceful lines of her slender, lithe body. Only now, there was also a white cloak draped over her shoulders, close in color to the pristine metal of the elegant plate armor. Changing Star's silver hair was much longer now, almost reaching her shoulders. Without the short tomboyish cut, she looked strangely mature and feminine, making Sunny's heart beat a little faster. Her calm gray eyes were as striking as ever. The true changes, however, hid much deeper. Perhaps only a person who knew her as well as Sunny did could notice them, or perhaps it was precisely because he had come to know her so well that the veil of detached indifference shrouding her true self cracked, revealing the deeper feelings beneath. Nephi seemed to be much more alive now, much more present. Her eyes shined with resolve and determination, radiating an almost infectious feeling of temperate confidence. This was her power. The power of conviction. Sunny shivered under that gaze. Neff was the person he longed to see the most and, at the same time, hoped to never see again. She was the true reason why he had to leave the castle. Stirred awake by this fated meeting, a torrent of memories rose to the surface of his mind. If only he had known at the time. Well, it would not have changed anything, really. For months ago, on the night that they had ventured into the cursed sea on a boat made of demon's bones, Sunny was shivering in the wind. After an eternity spent in the cold embrace of darkness, the endless night of their escape was finally drawing its last breaths. He shifted and turned to the east, where a ghostly line of pale lilac appeared over the horizon. Trembling, he licked his lips and said in a raspy voice, "Cass. Cassie. It's morning." After he uttered these words, the last remnant of strength that had kept Sunny going disappeared, and he slumped on the stones, his chest rising heavily and then falling. A new dawn was ready to bathe the desolate hell of the forgotten shore in warm sunlight. They had survived. The three sleepers were perched on a giant stone hand that protruded from the black waves, as if held above the lightless abyss by a goddess. Sunny and Cassie were holding each other for warmth, while Nephi's was lying in the center of the stone palm, still unconscious. Visible through the gaps in the shattered armor, her ivory skin was pale and listless. We did it. They had escaped the clutches of Soul Devourer, sailed through the cursed darkness, and even lived through a battle with the horrifying Dweller of the Depths. By some miracle. Sunny couldn't quite believe that they had actually managed to pull their daring escape off. From the moment he had learned about the enthrallment hex put onto their minds by the ancient fiend, he felt that the chances of ever saving themselves from the gluttonous evil tree were more than slim. Perhaps because it had taken away his most dangerous and tested weapon. His mind. And yet, somehow, they had succeeded. Utterly exhausted, Sunny closed his eyes and listened to the dark sea as it retreated to hide from the coming sun. Without even noticing it, he slipped into the embrace of sleep. When he awoke, the sun was already high in the sky. Sunny expected to feel crippled now that adrenaline had left his battered body, but, to his surprise, he wasn't in even half as much pain as he had anticipated. Bloodweave was truly a miraculous attribute to have for someone as prone to disasters as he was. Even his broken finger wasn't hurting that much anymore. Sunny still had to groan while sitting up, though. Cassie was sleeping by his side, as drained by the events of the previous night as he was. Perhaps even more so. Her delicate face seemed vulnerable and pale, twisted in an anxious frown. Sunny sighed. Nephi's had yet to regain her senses. At some time while he slept, the blind girl had used her cloak to cover Changing Star, helping her to preserve some warmth. Neff lay still and motionless, her face drained of all color. Only the quiet sound of her breathing told Sunny that she was still alive. He trembled, remembering the harrowing sight of her mangled flesh restoring itself in the crucible of purifying flame. Unleashing that flame always took a heavy toll on Nephi's, bringing her unimaginable pain and suffering. Who knew what price she had paid to pull herself away from the doors of oblivion? He had not even realized before that she could use it to heal herself. Perhaps there was a reason why she had never done so in the past. Only time could tell. It's time to assess the situation. Turning away from Changing Star, Sunny looked around, trying to discern their current circumstances. His heart was heavy. If they had survived the attack of the tentacle monster and the ensuing shipwreck only to find themselves stranded in the middle of the cursed sea, with no way to continue forward, that would be a truly macabre twist of fate. To the east of them, there was nothing but the empty expanse of the colossal crater. Same thing for the... Sunny froze, noticing a dark line in the distance. That was the western edge of the crater. They had almost crossed it. Feeling a strange excitement grasping his heart, Sunny quickly turned around and looked west. His eyes widened. For a few moments, his head was silent and empty. Then, a single thought appeared in it: we were so close. He sat quietly for a long time, forgetting about everything else. A few hours later, Cassie finally woke up. Feeling that he wasn't next to her anymore, she called in a frightened voice, "Sonny." He licked his lips. "I'm here." Cassie sat up and stretched her hand out, finding his shoulder. "Why? Why do you sound so strange?" Sonny blinked, then slowly turned his head to look at the blind girl. A tentative smile found its way onto his face. "Cassie. We found it. We have found that city you saw." In the end, Nephi's had remained unconscious for 2 whole days. Sonny was really starting to worry about her, but then, on the 3rd day, Changing Star had finally come back to her sense. At the time, he was sitting on top of the giant hand's index finger, staring west with a warm, excited feeling in his heart. They did it. They were finally going to go home. Sonny couldn't wait to return to the real world. He didn't even care about becoming an awakened and the corresponding leap in power and status that much anymore. All he cared about was his soft bed, mountains of delicious food, and limitless hot showers. Sonny lowered his head and glanced at Nephi's, trying to determine if there was anything wrong with her. In the webtoons, one of the characters was bound to suffer from something like amnesia right before things were about to take a turn for the better. But Changing Star seemed to be fine. She was still the same Nephi he had known, tall, firm, and strangely distant, as though there was an invisible barrier separating her from the rest of the world. When the gaze of her striking gray eyes fell on him, Sonny felt his heart beating a little faster. He smiled. "Thank gods." Nephi's frowned, lowered her head, and then asked in a flat tone, "Why are you smiling?" Realizing that he was grinning from ear to ear like a fool, Sonny blinked, then tried to shrug with false indifference. Abort. Divert her attention. Look behind you. The sight of what lay in the west was one of the reasons for his good mood, so it wasn't that much of a stretch. Neff stared at him for a few moments, then sighed and turned around. Behind her, a tall city wall built of gray polished stone towered above the slopes of the colossal crater. That wall was a sign that all their suffering was not in vain, and that all their dreams were about to come true. It was hope. Chapter 123, Helping Hand. Soon after Nephi's had finally come back to her senses, they prepared to leave the shelter of the giant stone hand. The morning had just begun, so there was plenty of time to cross the remaining distance and climb out of the deep and vast crater. If all was going to go well, they would meet the next sunset on top of the tall wall of the mysterious city. Of course, numerous things could go wrong between now and then. But, for some reason, Sonny felt optimistic. This was a rare moment for his cynical, paranoid heart. Just like before, Sonny and Neff took turns climbing down a few dozen meters and lowering Cassie to one another with the help of the golden rope. However, they had grown considerably stronger since the last time they had to do it. Sonny remembered how tiresome it was to descend from the giant knight statue in that way and chuckled. Now, he felt as though he could do it 3 times in a row, and considerably faster, too. Even though he had spent the last few days in an endless nightmare and brought his body to the point where it was about to shut down, now, there was nothing but resilient strength filling his muscles. These 2 months that they had spent in the perilous hell of the Crimson Labyrinth, constantly fighting for their lives and slaying monsters that no sleeper should ever face one after another, had made all 3 of them much more powerful. Sonny doubted that a lot of Awakened had ever gone through this ruthless of an initiation and lived to tell the tale. Once he returned to the real world, he would most likely be considered one of the elite representatives of the current generation. That might actually be a problem. Well, he could always blame everything on Nephi's. She was already close to being a mythical existence, the last daughter of the legendary Immortal Flame clan, one of the few Awakened in history who had managed to receive a true name in the first nightmare, the top student in her batch of sleepers in the academy, and so on. People would easily believe that a prodigy like her had been able, and willing, to carry 2 pathetic weaklings on her back all the way to the gateway. Sonny just had to choose his words carefully when describing the events leading up to their triumphant return. Luckily, in that regard, he was a master. Entertaining himself with such thoughts, he didn't even notice the flow of time. Soon, they were already approaching the ground. Just before jumping into the soft black mud, Nephi's looked at Sonny and said, "Stay vigilant." She didn't have to remind him. Sonny knew that the last stretch was often the most dangerous, mostly because it was natural for people to allow themselves to relax in these moments, falsely believing that the worst was already behind them. Numerous Awakened perished tragically with their goal already in sight. He wasn't planning on becoming one of them. Sunny carefully lowered Cassie down, watched as Neff helped her step out of the rope loop, and jumped down. He landed on the ground in a nimble roll, immediately jumped to his feet and outstretched one hand, ready to summon the Midnight Shard at a moment's notice. However, nothing was trying to kill them. Sunny and Nephi's exchanged tense looks, and then slowly walked forward. With each minute, the distant gray wall was growing closer. At some point, Sunny gestured for Changing Star to stop and turned around, curious to take a look at the statue whose hand had saved them from drowning in the dark depths of the cursed sea. Out there on the slope of the colossal crater, slightly tilted to the side, a giant statue of a slender woman dressed in a light flowing robe towered over the black mud. She was lovely and graceful, with a slim waist and delicate arms outstretched to the skies, as though trying to embrace them. At least that was how she had looked once, a long time ago. Now, one of the arms was broken off, with only its shoulder remaining in place. Luckily, the other one was still there, and had served as a safe haven for the three sleepers in their moment of desperate need. Just as Sunny expected, there were 7 shining stars carved into the stone surface of her robe. What piqued his curiosity the most, though, was the fact that just like the giant knight, the graceful woman seemed to be missing her head. Once again, Sunny wondered if these stone titans were created without faces to begin with, or if something had beheaded them much later in a fit of destructive rage. 7 severed heads guarding 7 seals, he thought, remembering Cassie's frightening vision. The mystery of that vision was nothing short of tantalizing. However, it seemed as though it was destined to remain unsolved. Sunny doubted that he would ever come back to this cursed place after returning to the real world. There were many regions in the dream realm, and almost every one of them was far better than the hellish forgotten shore. To hell with all this crap. Sending silent gratitude to the statue that had saved their lives, Sunny turned around and headed west. As they approached the section of the slope that was almost vertical, something dangerous finally happened. Just as Sunny was about to step on a wide stone buried in the mud, the stone suddenly shifted and rolled to the side. A terrible roar resounded across the vast emptiness of the colossal crater, making him shiver in fright. Fearing that something was crawling from under the soil, Sunny jumped back and summoned his sword. To his side, Nephi's was doing the same, while Cassie swiftly stepped back to not be in the way. However, there was nothing moving in the mud. No giant beast rose from it to feast on their flesh, no horrifying abomination had extended its limbs to pull them underground into its maw. Then, what made that terrible roar? Just as Sunny was trying to understand what was happening, a sharp pain suddenly pierced his right leg. Looking down, he saw. The damn stone was chomping on his shin. The stone, which turned out to be a bizarre nightmare creature, revealed a mouth full of long, sharp teeth on its surface. It awkwardly rolled a couple of times to reach Sunny and then tried to dig its fangs into his soft flesh. It might have bitten Sunny's leg clean off, but, luckily, the leather boot of the puppeteer's shroud turned out to be too tough for the stone's jaws. So it was just munching on the leather in powerless resentment. The situation was painful, but not at all dangerous. Sunny stared at the stone, then raised his head and glanced at Nephi's in bewilderment. Her expression was as indifferent as always, but after all the time they had spent together, he was able to recognize the similar kind of amusement written clearly on her face. Sunny strained his muscles, raised the trapped leg into the air and shook it a couple of times, trying to send the stupid stone flying. However, the weird monster was really stubborn. With another thunderous roar, it doubled its attempts to gnaw on Sunny's shin, its stone teeth on the verge of shattering from all the pressure exerted on them. What a pathetic thing. The only hope of killing me it has is if I die from annoyance, Sunny thought with a confused frown. How could a nightmare creature like this even exist? I guess there are losers even among their kind, eh? Shaking his head, Sunny allowed the shadow to wrap itself around the midnight shard and brought the tip of the blade down on the hungry stone with all the strength he had. The Tachi was met with some resistance, but managed to pierce and shatter the monster's stone body in the end. The bizarre creature died while still trying to take a bite out of Sunny, defiant till the very end. As the shattered remains of the stone fell into the mud, the voice of the spell whispered, "You have slain an awakened monster, rolling stone. Your shadow grows stronger. You have." Seeing a strange expression on Sunny's face, Nephi's asked, "What's wrong?" He looked at her and blinked a couple of times. I just received a memory." Changing Star raised her eyebrow and said in an uplifted tone, "That is great. What type of memory?" Sunny scratched his head, hesitated, and then answered, It's a rock. An ordinary rock.